Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and once again, thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. Just to remind you, on January the 6th, in a co-hosted Mindspeak with Kepsa and Vimal of Kepsa, our guest will be Christine Lagarde of the IMF, and that's January 6th, 3:30 to 5 o'clock at the Intercontinental Nairobi. Looking forward to that tremendously. As always, I'm deeply grateful to Bob Collymore and Safaricom for agreeing to put Christine Lagarde on a live feed. So we'll be beaming this Mindspeak to the world from the Intercontinental, and that always gets me excited. I'll put up a link for an interview I did with Bob not too long ago after the release of the first half results, and also another link for the Mindspeak sessions we've had this year. Home thoughts. Let me start with Jorge Luis Borges, who's a great writer. With relief, with humiliation, with terror, he understood that he too was a mere appearance dreamt by another. This remains my favorite. You have wakened not out of sleep, but into a prior dream, and that dream lies within another, and so on to infinity, which is the number of grains of sand. The path that you are to take is endless, and you will die before you have truly awakened. Let me leave you with one final one. To fall in love is to create a religion that has a fallible God. I took this photograph of the snow peaks of Mount Kenya. We were up there for 3 days, 2 nights, and didn't see the peaks until the day we were leaving, in fact. Both Hannah and I ran around and thoroughly enjoyed ourselves taking photographs of it. And the first evening we got there were these rather excellent drummers, dancers. They were really good. I've seen many in my lifetime coming from Kenya, but these guys were super. I thought the photographs sort of captured the groove that they had. And finally, it was fun having a lot of people around yesterday at the house and threw a party and really enjoyed ourselves. So I'll just put up a photograph of the table before everyone arrived. Political reflections. The UN told up to 500 killed in South Sudan clashes. 2 hospitals have recorded between 500 dead, up to 800 wounded, a diplomat in New York said on condition of anonymity. Juba government said it arrested 10 major political figures and was hunting for its former vice president, accusing him of leading a failed coup. The prominence of the names, including former finance minister Kosti Manibe, among those who had been detained, underlined the size of the rift in Africa's newest state. The United States urged its citizens to leave the country immediately and said it was suspending normal operations at its embassy. South Sudan is a strong ally of the US. It's got quite a development for them to be doing that. And obviously the situation, I concluded by saying, is very fluid, high beta, and too often I think political power is seen as very binary in Africa, winner takes all type thing. I'll put up a photograph of the VIP room at Juba Airport, taken 1,478 days ago. And one of my friends who came last night, who's accredited to Juba as well as Nairobi, was saying that there's a tank parked at each end of the airport. And I've been there a few times, I must admit. Once when President Bashir was there as well. I'll put up a photograph of Salva Kiir and remind you of the photograph I put up yesterday in his full military regalia. The former South Sudan vice president denies the coup attempt in Juba, calls Kiir an illegal president. This is in the Sudan Tribune. Former Vice President Riek Machar has categorically denied the existence or involvement in the alleged coup attempt in the capital, Juba, saying it was another undemocratic attempt by President Kiir to get rid of his political critics in the party and the government. He spoke to the Sudan Tribune for the first time since Sunday, said the violence on Sunday in Juba was a mere misunderstanding between the presidential guards. There was no coup. What took place in Juba was a misunderstanding between presidential guards within their division. It was not a coup attempt. I have no connection with or knowledge of any coup attempt, said Machar. President Kiir, of course, at a press conference held on Monday when he was dressed in his full military attire, said a group of soldiers allied to the former Vice President Dr. Riek Machar and his group attacked the army headquarters near Juba University. Described Machar as a prophet of doom who continues to persistently pursue his actions of the past, making reference to the 1991 split, which saw the latter defect from the rebel movement. However, I would like to inform you at the outset that your government is in full control of the security situation in Juba. Interestingly, Twitter is probably the best real-time source of what's happening. I found. What we wanted was to democratically transform the SPLM, but Salva Kiir wanted to use the alleged coup attempt in order to get rid of us, to control the government and the SPLM. We don't want him as the president of South Sudan anymore, he said, without further explaining his next moves. Riek Machar was, of course, the facilitator of the Journeyman Pictures interview with Joseph Kony. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. I wrote a piece some time ago called South Sudan's Oil Cut-Off, Brilliant Negotiating or Suicide, and I referred to this risk of lots of soldiers, far too many of them, in Juba, essentially. General Sir David Richards gave a warning about Al-Qaeda in Africa. The world should be paying more attention to the sub-Saharan threat from Al-Qaeda, a former head of the British Armed Forces has warned. General Sir David Richards said Britain needed to learn from what it has done and failed to do. Interestingly, he also questioned whether the NATO operation against Libya in 2011 was the right thing to do, suggesting it may have contributed to the spread of arms in the region. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work that one out. Of course, Somalia and Al-Shabaab, French troops responding to Islamist insurgents in Mali, Nigeria, they've got a state of emergency, and General Sir David told the BBC, I do worry very much that sub-Saharan Africa is the next front. In many ways, it already is. I think, that is quite correct. The comments about 2011 NATO-led campaign to remove Colonel Gaddafi I found interesting. He said that the campaign was a tactical success, but the jury was still out on whether it was strategically wise. I don't think it was, in fact. I wrote that piece, Gaddafi's Body in a Freezer, What's the Message, in October 2011. If you fancy it, do read it. Our Western friends made it clear in London that Assad cannot be allowed to go now because they think chaos and an Islamist militant takeover would ensue, said one member of the coalition. I put in brackets, took a very long time to work that one out. Somebody tweeted me this link, and I responded by saying, I think Assad essentially had to stare down a motley crew of hooligans mostly. I'll put up a photograph of him. Russia is not sticking to Assad, but the red line for Moscow is the preservation of the Syrian army. It realizes that with 5 decades' experience in the army and security, the Alawites are best placed to fight Islamist militants. Very interesting article on Reuters called Projecting Power. For the first time in centuries, China is building a navy that can break out of its confined coastal waters. And it's really a very good analysis of China's strategy in response to the pivot to Asia. And they're saying about this strategy, it tells Japan and the United States that they are not able to contain China within the first island chain, says Shen Dingley, security expert and professor at Shanghai's Fudan University. So don't bet on their chances to do so at a time of crisis. I'll put up that installation of the snake by A. Weiwei I came across in the Herschel because it best symbolizes for me the pivot to Asia. And I think the pivot is all about the encirclement of China. And I said this when I wrote that piece on the 2nd of December, the pivot to Asia bears its fangs. I see the pivot to Asia as the encirclement of China, then the shrinking of its operating theatre. And these are examples of trying to shrink it or pin it. And then lighting the tinderbox that is the periphery. And Xinjiang might well morph into China's Afghanistan. You will recall that the architect of Russia's defeat in Afghanistan was Zbigniew Brzezinski, who's now on Twitter, by the way, at ZBIG. And he remains a foreign policy eminence grise with the president's ear. The US probably feels it holds a decisive hard power advantage at this moment, given that the trajectory is projected to be one of gradual erosion of that decisive advantage, leads me to the view that this pivot to Asia has a logic and momentum of its own. Therefore, I see the US being increasingly determined to press its advantage. One might even posit that calming down the Iranian front allows the US to better concentrate its energies on the pivot to Asia. And I said that one of the key elements of the pivot to Asia is the air-sea battle concept. This concept envisages the battle beginning with a blinding attack against Chinese anti-access facilities and incorporates distant blockade operations. China's dependence on foreign oil is increasing just as the US's dependency is decreasing. And interestingly, given my belief that the eastern seaboard of Africa is a fabulous energy prize, that puts the Indian Ocean in many respects right into the geopolitical frame, which is what Maplecroft research was saying. If you are considering distant blockade operations, one of those areas you will be blockading is this part of the world, given the amount of energy that is likely to be sold from here into Asia in the future. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of the sunset as seen in Maputo Harbour. And then I could resist this photograph of two Saudi saleswomen in Harvey Nichols, the British luxury department store in Riyadh. Apparently in 2011, the Ministry of Labour ordered shops specialising in cosmetics, abayas, and wedding dresses, along with women's section of department stores, to begin shifting to all-female Saudi sales staffs. The process is called femininization. Currency markets: the euro 137.73, dollar index 80.05, yen 102.93, that's close to a 5-year high for the dollar versus the yen. Swiss franc 0.8849, the pound 162.84, Aussie 0.8904, reached 0.8882 yesterday, which was the lowest since August the 5th. Has fallen 1.5% in the past week and 5.5% in the past month. India rupee 61.88. The governor kept the repurchase rate unchanged at 7.75%. Only 5 of 31 analysts predicted that, actually, in a Bloomberg News survey. The rest expected an increase to 8%. There is merit in waiting for more data to reduce uncertainty, the central bank said, calling the decision a close one. South Korean won 10.51.34, very firm actually. Rial 231.92. Egyptian pound has been here for eternity, it seems, 688.72. Rand 1034.49. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and I don't think there's going to be a taper before Christmas. And therefore, I think that's probably headed back to around 79.60. Euro dollar 137.73, resilient, I think, headed to 140. Stock is at 133.80. Gold last trading at 1233.88. I'll put up a 1-year chart. I think, might rally a little bit on the no taper news in December, but I think it might well get to somewhere like 1,000 next year. Crude oil $97.68 has had a good strong rebound off recent lows. I think it's overdone now. Coming to Africa, Fitch put out a report that was actually on the 13th, and I missed it. Macro stability in sub-Saharan Africa supports a stable outlook, expecting growth to pick up in 2014, expects GDP growth to pick up slightly in 2014 to average 5.1%. However, median growth outside South Africa, the largest but also the slowest growing economy in the region, will rise to 6.3%. Saying that Africa's growth story is not mainly externally or commodity driven. Concerned about the prospect of Fed tapering, and saying that remains the biggest external risk to Africa in 2014. Making some comments about concerns about stock markets, in particular in Nairobi, and saying that a lot of the money that's come in is at risk of going back out again. I don't think that's the case, because a lot of the people I meet, the types of money I'm seeing coming in seems to me to be long-term money and not speculative. South African all-share is up 15.34% this year, bounced a little bit yesterday. Dollar Rand, I'll put up a 6-month chart, last trading at 1034.63. 1055 is key, close to where we are. Egyptian pound, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that, very solid. Egyptian stock market at a fresh 35-month high, up 26.26%. And incredibly, it's really rallied hard since Morsi was deposed. Nigerian all share up 43.18%. Interesting report of Bloomberg saying Nigeria's Jonathan has been weakened by oil funds probe, facing the biggest test of his 3 years in office after reports the central bank questioned the lack of accounting for $50 billion in oil revenue. And a former leader, this is Obasanjo, criticized him for failing to tackle corruption. Obasanjo, in a letter to Jonathan this month, said that he has failed to tackle graft and security threats in Africa's biggest oil producer. He accused him of widening a split between the mainly Muslim north and largely Christian south in a bid to retain power. And somebody saying, if the vote was tomorrow, the PDP would lose, which would be unprecedented for a ruling party in Nigeria. The prevailing narrative about the advantages of incumbency doesn't seem to be working in Jonathan's favor. And then giving some data on the excess crude account, it's not clear where all this money's gone. And, FX formation, currently FX reserves at $44.4 billion, down from $48.4 in June. But the main point is, and this is made by this fellow Angus Downey, the foreign exchange reserves position in Nigeria is not as robust as one would expect it to be, given that they are generating more than $90 billion per year. So clearly interesting times there. Ghana Stock Exchange up 79.81%. The FT has a very bullish article on how Africa offers growth potential on a vast scale, referring to Bob Diamond raising some money recently, and just basically everyone getting extremely excited. We're at the beginning of something, says Maria Ramos, the chief executive of Barclays Africa, and I tend to agree with her. The growth is healthy, says Danny Layfield, head of Africa for Standard Chartered. It's not just about banking either. Insurance is emerging as a financial product in the region. African banks often achieve returns on equity in excess of 20 to 30%, significantly above 10 to 15% more common in developed and emerging markets. And then, of course, there's an article also about Bob Diamond's African fund, Atlas Mara, which raised $325 million in a week. Coming to Kenya, Nakumatt, this is a report in Business Daily, is set to acquire 3 stores belonging to South Africa's ShopRite in Tanzania. This is a report that Business Daily are carrying. That's very interesting. Give Nakumatt a bigger presence in Tanzania, where it debuted in December 2011 with a 34,000 square feet Nakumatt Moshi outlet. The deal involves apparently the takeover of 3 ShopRite outlets, 1 in Arusha, 2 in Dar es Salaam, valued at 4 billion shillings. We've been informed The said takeover by Nakumatt and the whole deal is set to be concluded March next year, as senior ShopRite manager Narusha told the Business Daily on the phone. Atul Shah, as the managing director, played that down, said there is no news on this. We'll let you know if anything like this develops, Mr. Shah said in an email response to inquiries by the Business Daily. And that's an interesting move, a clever one, I think. He's rolling out his expansion. He's put the accelerator on the expansion plan. And I think that's the right thing to be doing. Especially because I think one of the bigger players is going to be extremely keen to enter. Base Titanium is pleased to announce that it has applied for its first export permit from the Ministry of Mining as it prepares for the first shipment of product from the Kwale Mineral Sands project in the coming weeks. The first shipment, comprising 100 tons of rutile, represents a key milestone in the development of the country's first large-scale mine. And I commend them, congratulate them, good friends, and very exciting times. The project is expected to contribute approximately $220 million to government revenue in direct tax and royalty payments. A further $800 million will be spent in operating the mine. Mshwari has pushed up the loan accounts by $1.7 million in 6 months. And you'll remember an October interview with the CBA CEO Jeremy Goodze, who said the numbers keep growing. We have now crossed the 5 million mark and giving up to 30,000 loans a day. Obviously, they're very small size loans. The Kenya shilling was last at 86.1 firmer. The Nairobi all-share, while still up 39.3% this year, has corrected 7.322% in a losing sequence which started on the 20th of November, and one hopes will stop today. The Nairobi NSE 20 is up 17.977%, and that's corrected 5.0807% since closing at a 64-month high on the 28th of November. Apparently, East African Portland Cement meeting has ended in chaos over a dividend payout. AGM held Tuesday turned chaotic after the main shareholders accused company directors of fabricating financial statements. Accusations were made by the government, which holds a 25% stake, and the NSSF, which holds a 27% stake. Trouble, according to those who attended the meeting, started with the Portland board chairman Mark Ole Kabalo opened the meeting by directing that the board will only take 3 questions from the shareholders, triggering agitation. The industrialization PS, Dr. Wilson Songa, and NSSF representative Gideon Chengo then moved to question why the company was paying a dividend when the firm's cash position was $450 million in the negative. Stocks of the firm have been overstated by $2.1 billion, and the $3.4 billion in debts owed by the company is close to $3.6 billion in current assets, which makes the firm literally insolvent. I'll put up a link so you can have a look at the share price data and look at the story as well. And I think it's going to actually, I had a meeting with Aidan, who was the cabinet secretary last week. He mentioned it. We have witnessed a slide back in Kenya. Now we fear for the domino effect in the region. Amadou Mata, CEO of the African Media Initiative. President Uhuru Kenyatta has unfortunately, in my view, signed into law a bill that journalists say threatens press freedom. And I wrote that piece about how the media belongs to the national interest, and indeed it does. Once again, thank you for stopping by. It's really appreciated, and hope to see you soon.